So on the previous video, we were finishing up that radio button. We have a couple of things to talk about with it. There's still two different attributes that are pretty popular when dealing with the radio or option button. The first is you can use the checked attribute to set the radio button to be checked at the beginning. Now note, because it's a radio button, only one can be selected at the beginning, but you can actually set which radio button is selected at the beginning of the form running. Then you can also disable different options if for some reason you needed to disable it. So for example, if this was on a e-commerce website and you're selling clothes, and because one particular clothing item becomes sold out in a particular size, you have to disable that size. That's why that option is there, because if that option is no longer available, it shouldn't be able to be selected by the user. So now from this point, we're going to move on and talk about the checkbox control. So checkboxes are also checkable, just like a radio button, but the checkbox, you can actually select multiple options. So here, just like the radio button, it uses the input tag, and this time the type would be checkbox. And then it's used to select any number of choices from a list. So you can select none, 1, 2, or as many as you want. This is basically a time where it would say check all that apply. That's what a checkbox is. A couple of remarks about it is that each choice is either on or off. And by default, they are all deselected unless you actually choose to start them at startup being checked. So you, by default, have all of your checkboxes start as deselected. But if you'd like one to be checked or two to be checked, then the user has to uncheck them. So kind of, for example, when you are signing up and buying something online and you have to use your email address and you have to uncheck the boxes to not get sent to the spam emails, that's what's happening there. Those are automatically selected for you unless you pay attention and actually deselect those options. Now, a couple of attributes is you, as I said, can automatically use and set your checkboxes to be checked. And then you can also set them to be disabled for a similar reason as the radio button. If for some reason something is sold out or something is unavailable at the time, you can actually disable a particular checkbox so that it can't be checked. All right, so the next one we're going to look at is a selection control, and that is where you have the drop-down menu. So you actually click on it, select from the drop-down menu, and then you can select your particular choice. So something to note here is, just like with the text area boxes, these have their own tags. So there are only two input selections or two input controls that have their own tags. That is the text area box and the select or selection button, selection menu option. So here, this is the second one that has its own tag. And this is used to create a selection menu in which the user can select one or more choices. So you're actually making it possible for somebody to select things from a selection menu and click through. And so you can kind of see that here you drop down and you'd pick the month where you play your best golf. A couple of remarks about this is it works like a list arrow drop-down menu. So you have that list arrow that you drop down right there. It prevents the user from having to type in this information into a text input control box. So it allows you to select right from that menu. It's suitable when you have a limited number of choices that are available. And whatever item is selected is the item that is highlighted in the list. So you've all seen this before. You drop down, you click Wisconsin because that's the state you're from, and then Wisconsin is highlighted because that was your selection. A couple of attributes that are used with the selection is you can do a size attribute, which specifies the number of options visible when the web page is open. So here, the size would only be 1, but you can actually display up to as many as you'd like, maybe 1, 2, 3 options for the user to select at a time. You can also do the multiple input control attribute. So what this attribute will do is it will allow you to select multiple items within a list. You can also disable particular choices in case something is sold out. And you can use the tab index here as well to set the tabbing order in advance. Another attribute that you need to know about is the option attribute. So this is something that pairs up with that select tag. So you have the option tag, which pairs with the select tag. And this is where you put all of your options. You'll have a select open and a select close tag. And then inside of there, you'll have your option tags that open and close that basically allow you to create the different options that will appear within your menu. And it helps you to kind of disable, select, etc. in advance the different options that you want to be selected at the beginning. So far, these are what we have covered. And what we'll learn to do is we'll learn to create a text box, a password box. We'll learn to create a radio button, a checkbox. We'll also learn a drop-down menu, and we'll do the text area box, and then we'll also do a submit the form and reset the form buttons at the very, very bottom. So a couple of other key vocabulary terms as we wrap up this unit. First is you'll need to be aware of the field set tags. So this is used to group together information. So this is not using an input tag, but it's also not an input control. It's a field set control. And what this does is it allows you to group together related pieces of information. So right now, if you look at this particular form, nothing's super exciting, nothing's grouped together. But if you look here, these are grouped together. Here we have login information and we have golf playing habits as ways to kind of group these together. So this login information is grouped up here, and then down here, the golf playing habits are grouped down there. So the field set tags allow you to group things together, and they use what are called legends to identify the groups. So it uses legends to identify the different groups that they're grouping together. It also makes your form a little bit easier to navigate and a little bit easier to use because you know what information will be needed in each part of the form. So as you can see here, we have different legends, and we have 2 groupings, 1 legend for each. Then from here, we're going to talk about those last 2 reset and submit control buttons. So we have the reset button, which has an input tag, and it says tag attribute type is reset. So if you're making a reset button, you'll set it to be a type of reset. And then from there, it's used to clear any input that was entered into the form. It basically sets it back to the default. So if you create a reset button and you make that reset button available, please note that when that reset button is selected, it will reset all of the values back to the default. So it will not leave any text you've typed. It also will not keep track of any checkboxes or radio buttons that have been selected. Then from here, you also have the submit button, which again uses that input tag and uses the type attribute of submit. And this will create a submit button. And then this is also used to send information to the appropriate location. So we'll put information within that input tag that will then tell the browser where to send a particular set of information. So these are how the 2 buttons will look. You can put whatever text you'd like to on each of those buttons. And then something to keep in mind on these last few slides are we're going to talk through the essential attributes that will be contained inside of each input control. So, for example here, the name attribute. So, as I said, these last few slides are the key essential attributes for input control. So, anything that has an input tag has to have these last few attributes. If it has an input tag, it has these. So, the first is every single one has a name, and that's so that when information is typed in, it has a name identifying what the information is. So, maybe it's last name, first name, movie choice, golf habits, whatever it might be. They all have a name, and this identifies the name of that input control and the specific information that is being identified when the form is submitted. So if it says name equals last name, then your computer will kind of identify it when it sends an email and say the last name was blank. It will help you do that if you use that name attribute. This remark or this particular attribute is required for all input controls except for submit and reset. So you will have to use the name attribute every single time. Then from here, every input tag also has a type. So this is determining what type of input control you have, whether it's a radio button or a text box or a checkbox or a password box, whatever that might be. Every single one has a type. Now, something to note is that the text area and the select will not have to have a type simply because they have their own tags. But everything else, submit and reset button included, will need to have a type.